Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second annual International eConference on Atheism. My name is Dr. Darren Slade, and I'm the president of the Global Center for Religious Research, which is hosting this year's academic conference. Now, something to keep in mind is that GCRR is not interested in converting or deconverting anybody from any particular belief system. We are strictly an academic institution, and we seek to approach the discussion of God and suffering purely from a scholastic standpoint, whether that standpoint is theistic, atheistic, or something else entirely. Now, that's actually, in fact, one of the greatest things about GCRR is that you're being joined by students, scholars, and specialists from all over the world with a whole bunch of different backgrounds and traditions, right from the comfort and safety of your own home. Also, as a special gift to everybody, all you have to do is go to gcrr.org, our website, and look up our newest publication called God and Horrendous Suffering. And with that, all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom, and you can download a special sneak preview of the book by clicking the preview button. And if you end up wanting to purchase that book, we do recommend that you go through the GCRR website because our prices are a lot lower. But also, we're going to give you 15% off more than on the retail price. All you have to do is use the promo code SUFFERING, and that's all in lowercase. Use the promo code SUFFERING at checkout. With that said, I would like to introduce to you my very good friend and our next presenter, Mark Gura. Allow me to share my screen to give a proper introduction. Now, Mark's presentation today is entitled Testing the Buddha. Mr. Gura is an author and speaker. He is president of Atheist Alliance of America. He's the former host of the Richard Dawkins Award, former secretary of the Atheist Republic, and he's the president of the Association of Mindfulness, Meditation, and Secular Buddhism. We are so privileged to have you here. So thank you so much for doing this. Mark, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you so much, Darren. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Okay, so it's so great to be here with you all, and we're going to be talking about really the most important, I think, topic in existence: our happiness, and thus suffering, the other end of that the other end that challenges our happiness. And just some quick housekeeping items. I'm going to be simplifying Buddhism to its essential core from a meditator's perspective. And when referring to traditional Buddhism, I'll be referring to Theravada Buddhism. And the citations are in the text herein mostly, but full citations are in the book. So what I want to start with is just to kind of understand who the Buddha was from an atheist perspective, from a secular perspective, from a human perspective, and what was he trying to achieve, if the Buddha actually existed at all. And really, if you think about it, what Buddhism was created to deal with suffering. Siddhartha Gautama, and by the way, the title of the Buddha loosely means enlightened person. So that title came later. But he was born as a prince or a chieftain's son. Most people know this story. I'll just go through it really quickly. But he became disenchanted with his life, with his privileged life, with the material things that he had an abundance of, and the worldly attainments that he was expected to accomplish. And he was overwhelmed by thoughts of the suffering that occurs in the world, and the suffering that he learned about, and the suffering that he knew would eventually perhaps hit him as well. So he renounced his kingdom, his inheritance. He became an ascetic. He traveled around his known world, studying all forms of the religions that were available during his day, and he practiced all the different forms of meditation, coming to the conclusion that suffering could probably be eradicated through meditation, through internal means, through psychological means, more so than through external means. And that kind of makes sense because, we can't control our world. No matter what we gain in the world, we're going to wind up, those things are going to be challenged eventually. by time or by circumstances. And so often it's more about how we deal with our trials and our tribulations, especially in our own mind, in our own brain, than really how we organize our external world. And that's the conclusion, I think, that the Buddha came to. And so this great renunciation story, which I just referred to, roughly 2,600, 2,500 years ago. So old, before Christianity was on the scene, before Islam was on the scene, the Buddha was trying to eradicate suffering psychologically. And his claim to fame is that he supposedly discovered meditation techniques that eradicate suffering. And these meditation techniques are supposed to show results in everyday life, here and now, and not just after death, not just in some enlightened plane after we die. And so Buddhism unfolds the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, which kind of summarize the path, help a person get on the path. But really the path, nirvana itself in the Buddhist sense, nibbana, if you want to use the Pali term, it's all about cessation of suffering. And it's about cessation of suffering here and now as well. So really what Buddhism is claiming is that if you meditate properly, if you learn how to meditate properly in the Buddhist way, and usually it's said right up front that it's going to take years, many years, maybe lifetimes, and you do it on your own without the aid of drugs or machines, stuff like that. It's very important to be able to do it on one's own, because anything that's used externally to foster this state of mind is not your own unless it comes from within. So if you do it properly on your own, the promise is your suffering, your psychological suffering, will be lessened. And then it'll eventually go away. And then after death, even more so. And that's what traditional Buddhism says, the after death part. So the premise here is that you can teach your brain to be satisfied with reality with each moment. You can eradicate the craving that you have for alternate realities, because that's really what causes your suffering. And so no craving equals no suffering. And that's why you'll hear a lot about craving when you talk to Buddhists or when you read Buddhist texts. So Buddhism's fundamental core claim is that meditation can lead to the cessation of suffering. And our question is, can it? Buddhist scriptures advocate that the cessation of suffering and happiness are psychological phenomenon. And, so obviously, we're talking about some sort of psychology here. So being the skeptics that we are at the Atheist Alliance of America, at the Association of Mindfulness Meditation, and secular Buddhism, I'll tell you about secular Buddhism in a second, we're all about, testing claims, right? So testing the Buddha. So our goal is to gather interest and inform about a peer-reviewed study that we're going to be conducting. And this is going to be the first study where a major religion is either confirmed or falsified based on its own claims in a science lab. And, studies have been done already about the health aspects of meditation and Buddhist meditation and the stress release aspects of meditation. But we're conducting a study that ethically, scientifically, replicably, in a peer-reviewed way, will test whether enlightened people, if we can find any, have achieved cessation of suffering. And enlightenment, there are several stages of enlightenment, so we don't have to find a full-blown Buddha that flies through the sky. So compared to other religions, other major religions, Buddhism is the most testable for several reasons that I'll mention. Because Buddhism doesn't, and I'm saying traditional Buddhism of the Theravada earliest Buddhism, does not credit the Buddha with creating the world or having the power to stop suffering unwanted things. The Buddha is not considered a creator God with a capital G, unlike the other major religions. And therefore, the Buddha is not really, according to the scripture, the Buddhist scriptures, responsible for suffering in the world. Quite the contrary, we are responsible for our own suffering in the world, according to Buddhism, because how we organize our own brain is how our own suffering manifests itself for us. So the Buddha doesn't make any claims to be a god. I know later some Buddhists have made a god out of the Buddha. That was not, according to everything I've ever read of early Buddhism, that was never the intention. Basically, the Buddha was just a guy who suffered, or who knew he would suffer, and he learned how not to suffer. And then for the rest of his life, he spent teaching other people how not to suffer. So the claim is that, after extensive year-long regimens of meditation, you transform your psyche, and this causes enlightenment or non-suffering for anybody who is able to practice correctly, and not everybody will be able to practice correctly. So there's no promise that everybody can achieve enlightenment in Theravada and early Buddhism. Meditation gives Buddhism a unique position amongst religions, and specifically Buddhist meditation, because really it's the only major religion that makes a claim, a core claim, that can be measured, tested, falsified, or confirmed. The other major religions promote the idea that gods exist, that they can provide ultimate happiness, that they can provide ultimate non-suffering. Buddhism scoffs at that, saying, well, if a god can provide happiness for you, then you are a robot. You don't have free will because something else externally to you is controlling your brain or your psyche or your essence or whatever you want to call it. And the other thing is, so Buddhism kind of runs contrarian to the other major religions. And Buddhism also warns its practitioners that finding external means of happiness lead to suffering. And that includes worshiping gods. So as you can imagine, Buddhism made quite a stir when it showed up in ancient times in Hindu societies, where the name of the game was to worship gods. And Buddhism said, don't worship gods, because worshiping gods actually will create suffering for you, because you're going to be attached to something external that you have no control over. And that external agent is going to basically mess with your happiness, because your happiness is going to be in their hands. Don't worship gods, learn how to meditate, you'll stop suffering. So Buddhism was all about eradicating stress and suffering internally. And, let's face it, if we tried to do this study for Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, we'd run into some problems, because the other major religions put forth claims, and their essential core claims are not very testable. How are you going to test if Jesus rose from the dead in a laboratory? Because that's really the essence of Christianity. If Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true, but Christianity doesn't have any verifiable evidence for that. Hearsay is not verifiable evidence, and we can't test that in the laboratory. Islam, saying that the Prophet Muhammad spoke with God, how are you going to test that today in a laboratory? Judaism's claim that God exists, untestable. Hinduism's claim that multiple gods exist, untestable. Buddhism's claim that Buddhist meditation can eradicate unnecessary suffering, testable in a laboratory. So Buddhism is not, and what I want to do is kind of give you an outline of truly, simply at its essence, what Buddhism truly is, because it's the concept's gotten so mucked around because there's so many different perspectives on it that, unless you study it for years, especially as a meditator, it's very difficult to truly understand it. But Buddhism is not theism. As mentioned, the Buddha never wanted anyone, according to the earliest scriptures, to worship gods. and he didn't claim to be a god that needed to be worshipped. And this is right in the scriptures, and oftentimes it's hidden. But one of the first statements that he supposedly made, according to the scriptures, after he became enlightened, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can see it on the screen, is that he had been searching for the creator of, what created him, the Buddha, what, as a man searching to find the answer to how not to suffer. He'd been searching all his life for who created him. And what he found out is that he created himself. His mind creates his essence, his existence. And he finally, now knowing that no one else outside of him created him, has found the answer. So this is a very atheistic thing to say in a very Hindu society, that he was born to try to protect, according to his family, his ancestors, who wanted him to further the family religion. But the Buddha basically went against all that and said, the ridgepole's shattered, the rafters are broken. I've figured out, what it's all about, and it's not about gods. It's not about God. And of course, the world at the time believed in gods, but also rebirth and reincarnation. And we'll talk about rebirth and reincarnation in a second. So the Buddha did make it clear, though, that he didn't think faith in reincarnation or rebirth was required. And reincarnation and rebirth, two different concepts, too much to get into right now. So let's just say that to simplify things for now. But the main claim of Buddhism is that the Buddhist techniques eradicate suffering in this life, and then that carries forth into future lives, if such things even exist, because there are various forms of Buddhism, we'll talk about them in a second, where rebirth, belief and faith in rebirth is not necessary. So this is quite a departure, what the Buddha brought forth to the world from everything else that existed at the time. And we tend to misunderstand Buddhism because we tend to, or the people in the West people theists in the West tend to look at Buddhism from a theist lens. They tend to kind of say, oh, you're praying to the Buddha. It's a God, he's saving humans. That's a very theist lens, which is totally, it's incorrect. It's incorrect for what was meant, for what the Buddha meant. Because the Buddha credits his enlightenment to his mind, not to God's. And he basically gives the promise that it's not gods that are going to save you. It's your own work in learning how to meditate that's going to destroy your cravings and it's going to help you attain cessation of suffering. So he's proposing a psychological, a meditation type solution. So the question is so often asked, well then is Buddhism a religion? And I define religion as any system of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, whose core concepts refer to the supernatural. And so there are two types of Buddhism, really. Traditional Buddhism, and traditional Buddhism does refer to the supernatural, to rebirth, to gods with a small g, which really are spirits, but they've been kind of theized by our Western culture. And so I think traditional Buddhism is a religion. I think it fits that definition. But I think secular Buddhism is a philosophy. So both answers are correct, depending on how you're practicing Buddhism. And so some people are shocked when Buddhism is given that label of religion, but I think that definition where the supernatural is an element of, if the supernatural is an element of a philosophy, and that's what makes something a religion, I think is very important, because otherwise football and science even and all kinds of things could be considered a religion, and that's totally ridiculous. I don't think the idea that something is practiced fervently should qualify it as being a religion. I think fervent practice with a mixture of supernaturalistic faith is a good core cornerstone of a definition that should meet what a religion is. But what I really want to emphasize is that Buddhism's paranormal claims, Buddhism's supernatural claims, even amongst traditional Buddhists, are not the most important thing, or almost inconsequential to enlightenment. And I'll talk about that more in a second, but it's really all about cessating suffering. And so secular Buddhism utilizes Buddhist culture, Buddhist ethics, philosophy, and meditation techniques without referring to the paranormal or to supernatural claims. Secular Buddhists only believe claims that are confirmed by the best science available. They don't support gurus or believe in gods or rebirth or anything supernatural. Whereas traditional Buddhists do embrace those traditional beliefs, but both traditional and secular Buddhists, I think, agree that the ones who truly know the religion and who've practiced meditation truly know that really meditation is the key to Buddhism. In the scriptures, the Malankupataya tells the Buddha that he would not devote his life to meditation until the Buddha declared what happened to the soul and if the cosmos was infinite. So here was this guy, Malankupataya, and he meets the Buddha and he says, look, I'm not gonna practice what you're teaching until you tell me what happens after death. And the Buddha says to him what's now called the parable of the poisoned arrow. Look, if you were shot by an arrow, you wouldn't care, and you were suffering, you wouldn't care who shot you in the moment. You just want to live. You just want the arrow gone. Especially if the arrow was smeared with poison, you'd want to be saved from the arrow. You wouldn't care who shot you, how they shot you, what bow they were using. So I'm not going to get into afterlife beliefs with you. Afterlife beliefs are of no consequence to enlightenment. What's most important about enlightenment is your work in meditating correctly. And really that's the core essence of Buddhism is meditate correctly and learn how not to suffer. So this is mirrored in other places in the scripture as well. So really the huge takeaway here is there's two forms of Buddhism, really. There's the traditional Buddhism that uses the methods that refer to the supernatural, that believes in reincarnation, deities, and so on and so forth, and secular Buddhism that requires no supernaturalism. And with secular Buddhism, a Buddhist can practice the ethics of Buddhism or the meditation or the philosophy, but they don't have to believe in supernatural stuff. So what does Buddhism say about eradication of suffering in reference to reincarnation and rebirth and stuff like that? And why is that not important to Buddhism, really? It's because the Buddhism stresses that suffering as a psychological phenomenon is what it's all about, and it stresses that human stress is self-created. It can be eradicated through proper rewiring of our neuroscience, and so secular Buddhists don't require that extra element of rebirth. And for example, when karma is mentioned, karma is a Sanskrit term that means action or doing, and the whole idea is that from moment to moment, we're doing something within our own brain. We're creating mental and habits that turn into physical habits that become a part of us, that become patterns that shape who we are, that the world then reacts to. And so really this word karma really means character or personality. And for traditional Buddhists, this personality, this character continues into future lives. But for secular Buddhists, it doesn't, because secular Buddhists don't believe in future lives. But what both types of Buddhists agree to is that one's character is formed by one's mental actions and is forever changing. So Buddhism doesn't believe in any kind of an eternal soul or anything like that. And that's the case for traditional Buddhism as well. Even though traditional Buddhism believes that some sort of character survives after death and basically creates a new body around itself. Not that it actually enters a new body. That's another mischaracterization that people don't understand about Buddhism often. So in traditional Buddhism, a being is reborn because of its former character and continuously shapes his or her or their brain, and and becomes this continuously becomes a new persona, and that continues, not because some god or some force in the sky keeps some ledger in the sense of, you did something bad and I'm going to write this down now because you have bad karma now. Think of karma in the Buddhist sense as a form of a character, as your character, as your personality. So these character traits, continue in traditional Buddhism into future lives. In secular Buddhism, they don't. But secular Buddhism describes this as neural pathways that we're continuously producing. So if we're producing neural pathways that cause stress and suffering, we will continue to produce stress and suffering. If we continue, a traditional Buddhist might say, if you develop a neural pathways that where suicide is an option, or homicide is an option, or depression is an option, then it's going to be a lot easier for you in future lifetimes to when you're born to embrace what you've done in the past. So traditional Buddhism believes that future bodies are formed because of our past habits, and they do believe that people are born in the future as animals, but not because of punishment, but because if one doesn't have the needs of a human and the needs of an animal are satisfactory, then it doesn't matter. You don't really need to be born as a human because you don't really have those needs of a human. So it's all about the character that you're building, the intentions that you're building, what you're manifesting, but not in any kind of wooey or spooky way when it comes to secular Buddhism, but just from a day-to-day kind of existence. And a non-human birth is considered to be a disadvantage because the Buddha said, or the scriptures say, that animals do not know how to, or cannot meditate using Buddhist meditation in the same way that humans can. So it's considered favorable to be human and to be able to utilize Buddhist meditation to break that cycle of birth and death in the traditional Buddhist sense, and not be reborn as a suffering being. So there are supernatural references in Buddhist scriptures, but secular Buddhists kind of take the Thomas Jefferson Bible approach, and do not believe in anything that cannot be confirmed by evaluation, by falsification, by science. So traditional Buddhists do. So, for example, traditional Buddhists believe that the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, attained at least 17 supernatural powers after enlightenment. But traditional Buddhists agree that those supernatural superpowers are irrelevant to non-suffering. They're irrelevant to enlightenment. That was just something extra that this particular Buddha was able to attain. And you see some of the superpowers here, like levitating and foretelling the future and taming wild animals and regrowing flesh on the persons, but just ridiculous.
And one last thing you might want to know is that the Global Center for Religious Research has established the most comprehensive international research group to study the causes, manifestations, and treatment options for those suffering from religious trauma. But we have a big problem. See, in order for victims of religious trauma to receive help, we need to arrive at a place in our culture where religious trauma is recognized as a real mental health condition. And unfortunately, the academic study of religious trauma is still in its infancy. This means that there are no exhaustive empirical studies to support what we have seen and experienced, that religious trauma exists and is a chronic problem. As it stands, really only anecdotal case studies have been published so far, but nothing substantially empirical. And GCRR wants to correct this gap of knowledge, and we're hoping to get your help with that. So we have set up a GoFundMe page in order to crowdsource the world's very first, most comprehensive sociological study on the existence, causes, and manifestations of religious trauma. Now, the reason we are crowdsourcing this stuff is because we were actually set to get a grant, federal grant for this research project, and then the federal government halted all funding for mental health research. So we were left holding the bag. That's why we're hoping the public can join us in this effort. All you have to do is go to GoFundMe.com and search for the phrase religious trauma sociological study, or you can click the link that I'm going to put in the chat box. And at the very least, please share this GoFundMe page across all your social media platforms just to get the word out about this really important research project.